That's the wrong formula.
The fate of a $150 million deal didn't hinge on the billionaire's signature or the investor's nod. It rested on a whisper from a waitress no one had even noticed. In the hushed, opulent dining room of the Gilded Compass Billionaire, Damien Sterling reached for his custom Mont Blanc pen, the final flourish to secure his legacy. At that exact moment, a voice, soft but sharp as cut glass, sliced through the tension. "Sir, that's the wrong formula." The whisper that would either cost a young woman her job or save an empire from ruin. But for Ilara Vance, it was more than a correction. It was the moment her past came crashing into her present, and nothing would ever be the same. The Gilded Compass wasn't just a restaurant, it was a stage. Every night the curtains rose on a play of power, wealth, and ambition, and Ilara Ellie Vance had a backstage pass. Her role was simple: be invisible, be efficient, be silent. Tonight her apron felt heavier than usual, the starched fabric, a constant reminder of the life she was supposed to have versus the one she was living. At 27, Ellie wore the exhaustion of someone twice her age. Her brilliant blue eyes, once alive with the spark of scientific discovery, were now dimmed by the fatigue of double shifts and the constant worry of mounting debt. The crisp white shirt and black trousers of her uniform were a costume hiding the person she used to be, a doctoral candidate at Caltech, a rising star in the world of chemical engineering, a mind that danced with complex molecular structures. That life had imploded 3 years ago. A single phone call about her mother's aggressive and experimental cancer treatment had shattered her world. She dropped out of her PhD program, trading a state-of-the-art laboratory for a battlefield of medical bills and insurance denials. The crushing debt forced her into the only work that offered quick, under-the-table cash and flexible hours waiting tables at the most exclusive restaurant in the city. Vance Table 7 needs water. Now barked her manager, Mr. Dubois, a man whose ambition had curdled into petty tyranny. He took a particular sour pleasure in reminding Ellie of her station. "This isn't a library. Stop daydreaming and move." Ellie nodded her face, a mask of compliance. "Yes, Mr. Dubois." She moved with a practiced grace, her worn-out but polished shoes making no sound on the marble floor. She refilled water glasses, her senses on high alert. To survive at the Gilded Compass, you had to be more than a server. You had to be an observer. You learned to read the subtle shifts in a customer's posture, the tightening of a jaw, the flicker of an eye. You learned to anticipate needs before they were spoken. Tonight, the air in the private dining suite, the Elysian room, was electric. It was the most coveted table reserved for the city's titans, and tonight's titan was Damien Sterling, CEO of Sterling Innovations. Ellie knew the name. Everyone did. He was a ruthless visionary, a man who had built a multi-billion-dollar tech empire from the ground up. He was sharp, demanding, and legendarily impatient. Serving his table was like walking a tightrope over a shark tank. Every movement had to be perfect. As she entered the Elysian room with a fresh pitcher of ice water, the gravity of the meeting hit her. Sterling wasn't alone. With him was his notoriously slick Vice President Marcus Thorne, a man who oozed ambition from every pore of his tailored suit. Across the table sat 2 Japanese businessmen. The elder, a man with a face as impassive as a stone garden and eyes that missed nothing, was introduced only as Mr. Tanaka. He was the chairman of the Kaito Group, a global investment firm known for its meticulous due diligence and its power to make or break companies. Ellie's mind, the part she tried to keep dormant during her shifts, began to whir. Sterling Innovations specialized in next-generation energy solutions. The Kaito Group was looking to dominate the global market. This wasn't a dinner. It was a negotiation, a very, very big one. She moved around the table, a silent ghost refilling glasses. Her focus was on the task, but her ears couldn't help but catch the snippets of conversation words like scalable production, market penetration, and proprietary technology. They were words from her old life echoes, from a world she had lost. For a fleeting second, a painful ache of longing bloomed in her chest. She pushed it down, burying it under the immediate need to get through the next 5 hours. She placed the last glass down, and as she turned to leave, Damien Sterling's voice, cold and precise, stopped her. "Waitress." She froze, turning back slowly. "Sir." He didn't look at her. His eyes were fixed on Mr. Tanaka. "The sommelier. I want the 92 Screaming Eagle, and I don't want to see you again unless you're holding it." It was a dismissal, a clear signal of her irrelevance. "Of course, sir," she said, her voice even. As she walked out of the room, her invisibility cloak wrapped tightly around her. Once more she had no idea that in less than an hour she would be forced to make herself the most visible person at that table, risking everything on the ghost of the woman she used to be. The weight of the tray in her hands was nothing compared to the weight of the knowledge she was about to discover. The 92 Screaming Eagle was stored in the deep cellar, a hallowed vault where bottles of wine slept like ancient kings, their value appreciating with every passing second. Locating it gave Ellie a brief reprieve from the charged atmosphere of the Elysian room. As she handled the bottle with the reverence of a museum curator, she could feel the weight of its $15,000 price tag. It was more than she made in 4 months. The absurdity of it all, the casual decadence, just a few feet away from her own desperate struggle, was a familiar, bitter pill. Returning to the room, she performed the ritual of presentation and uncorking with flawless precision. Damien Sterling gave a curt, dismissive nod, his attention already back on the conversation. He was a man carved from granite, and ambition, his dark hair lightly dusted with silver at the temples, his eyes the color of a stormy sea. He radiated an aura of absolute control, a man so used to bending the world to his will that he no longer considered any other possibility. His vice president, Marcus Thorne, was a stark contrast. Where Sterling was solid and immovable, Thorne was fluid and slick. He laughed a little too loudly at his boss's dry remarks and leaned forward with a sycophantic eagerness that set Ellie's teeth on edge. He was a corporate predator, and tonight he was closing in on his prey. But the true power at the table, Ellie sensed, was the silent man opposite them. Mr. Kenji Tanaka of the Kaito Group listened more than he spoke. His stillness was not passive. It was observant, predatory in its own quiet way. He absorbed every word, every gesture, his gaze analytical. His younger associate took meticulous notes, his pen scratching softly in the otherwise silent pauses. The potential here is not just financial. Kenji Sterling was saying, his voice a low, persuasive rumble. He had shifted from business formalities to a first-name basis, a classic power move. This is about legacy. The Sterling-Kaito partnership will redefine energy storage. Our new electrolyte composition for lithium-sulfur batteries isn't an iteration. It's a revolution. Ellie's ears perked up. Lithium-sulfur batteries. Her doctoral thesis had been on that exact subject. She had spent 5 years of her life exploring the polysulfide shuttle effect, trying to stabilize the cathode wrestling with the very problems Sterling Innovations was now claiming to have solved. A phantom limb twitched in her mind, the familiar urge to grab a whiteboard and start diagramming electron flows. She forced it down, focusing on clearing the appetizer plates. "Your claims are bold." Damien-san, Mr. Tanaka, said, his English perfect and unaccented. Many have tried to crack the Lie-S problem. All have failed to achieve commercial viability due to rapid capacity decay. And that Marcus Thorne interjected, seizing his moment, is where our proprietary formula comes in. He slid a sleek, wafer-thin tablet across the polished mahogany table. The key is in the electrolyte. We've developed a novel, covalent network integrated with the separator. It effectively traps the lithium polysulfides, preventing the shuttle effect almost entirely. Thorne tapped the screen, and a complex chemical structure diagram bloomed to life. Lines, letters, and numbers arranged in a delicate, intricate dance. To the others, it was an abstract symbol of innovation. To Ellie, it was a language she understood as fluently as her own name. Mr. Tanaka leaned forward, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied the diagram. Impressive. Your simulations show stability over how many cycles? 10,000 cycles with less than 5% degradation, Thorne said, his voice swelling with pride. Unheard of. This formula is the key to the entire $150 million valuation for this phase of the partnership. Damien Sterling watched Tanaka's reaction, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. He was the master showman, letting his underling present the details while he controlled the narrative. He swirled the deep red wine in his glass, the picture of supreme confidence. He was about to close the biggest deal of his career. Ellie moved to refill Mr. Tanaka's water glass, her path taking her directly behind Marcus Thorne. For a brief, fatal second, her gaze fell upon the tablet screen. She saw the elegant dance of molecules, the notation for the covalent bonds, the specific ratios of the compounds. She saw it all. And then she saw it. The mistake. It was tiny. A single misplaced subscript in the formula for the primary solvent. A 2 where a 3 should have been. A detail so small, so insignificant to the untrained eye, it would be missed by 1,000 executives and 100 lawyers. But to a chemical engineer who had lived and breathed this specific chemistry, it was a glaring, catastrophic error. It was a time bomb. A jolt, cold and electric, shot through Ellie's body. Her breath hitched. The world around her seemed to slow down, the confident drone of Marcus Thorne's voice fading into a meaningless hum. All she could see was the glowing screen of the tablet, the formula burning itself into her memory. The familiar equation for the discharge process was there, but the solvent formula beside it, the one they claimed was the secret sauce, was fundamentally wrong. The misplaced subscript wasn't a typo. It changed the entire molecular weight and bonding properties of the compound. The covalent network Thorne was so proud of wouldn't just be ineffective. It would be unstable. Under the high current density required for rapid charging, it wouldn't trap polysulfides. It would break down. It would decompose and produce hydrogen sulfide gas inside a sealed battery cell that meant one thing: thermal runaway. A fire, an explosion. Her mind raced, flashing back to a windowless lab at Caltech. She could almost smell the ozone and antiseptic cleanness. She remembered Professor Albright, her mentor, a brilliant but merciless man staring at her own early thesis work. Close Miss Vance, he had said, his red pen slashing through her calculations. But in chemistry, close is the difference between a Nobel Prize and a hole in the ceiling. Precision is everything. This was worse than a hole in the ceiling. This was a flaw at the heart of a $150 million deal, a flaw that could lead to product recalls, lawsuits, and potentially serious injuries. Sterling Innovations would be ruined. The Kaito Group's investment would literally go up in smoke. Panic and adrenaline warred within her. Her first instinct was to say nothing. What business was it of hers? She was a waitress. A nobody. If she spoke up, she'd be laughed out of the room, fired on the spot, and blacklisted from every restaurant in the city. Mr. Dubois would see to that. She could picture the scene, the powerful men looking at her with contempt, Marcus Thorne with smug victory, Damien Sterling with icy rage. Keep your head down. Finish your shift. Go home and forget you saw anything. She retreated from the table, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the water pitcher. She stood by the service station in the corner, trying to regulate her breathing, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from them. She watched Mr. Tanaka nod slowly, a look of genuine impressed satisfaction on his face. He exchanged a look with his associate. This was it. They were convinced. This is... Most promising, Sterling-san Tanaka said, a rare note of warmth in his voice. My team has reviewed the preliminary data you sent, and this final piece of the puzzle aligns with our projections. We are prepared to proceed. He reached into his briefcase and produced a fine, leather-bound folder. The contract. The sight of that folder was like a punch to the gut. The finality of it. They were going to sign. They were going to build a company on a foundation of sand, on a formula that was a ticking time bomb. Ellie's conscience screamed at her. This wasn't just about money or business. It was about scientific integrity. It was about the truth. The work she had dedicated her life to was being misrepresented, twisted by a careless, arrogant fool like Marcus Thorne, who had probably fudged the numbers to impress his boss. Her years of relentless study, the sacrifices she had made, her mother's belief in her, it all felt like a mockery if she stood by and did nothing. Damien Sterling was already retrieving his pen, a magnificent silver instrument. Mr. Tanaka opened the folder. The room was silent, thick with the anticipation of a historic moment. Ellie's heart hammered against her ribs. Every instinct for self-preservation told her to stay put, to remain invisible. But the ghost of the scientist she once was, the woman who believed in precision and truth above all else, refused to be silent. She had lost her career, her future, her mother. She had nothing left to lose but a dead-end job. And in that moment, that didn't seem like enough to trade for her soul. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, she pushed off from the wall. She began to walk towards the table, each step an act of defiance against the life that had been forced upon her. She had no plan, no idea what she would say. She only knew she couldn't let them sign. The world narrowed to the few feet of plush carpet between the service station and the Elysian Room's grand table. To the men seated there, Ellie's approach was a minor, insignificant event, the waitress returning to clear a glass or offer more coffee. They didn't even look up. Their entire universe was contained in the crisp black ink of the contract and the gleaming tip of Damien Sterling's pen. Ellie's mind was a maelstrom. "What are you doing? Turn back. This is insanity. He'll destroy you." The voice of fear was loud, rational, and compelling, but beneath it was a quieter, firmer voice, the voice of Professor Albright, the voice of her own forgotten principles. Precision is everything. She reached the table just as Sterling uncapped his pen. The click echoed in the silent room like a gavel falling. Time was up. There was no grand way to do this, no way to interrupt without causing a scene. She had to be quick, discreet, and hope for a miracle. She defaulted to the only role she was allowed to have in this room, the deferential server. Leaning in towards Damien Sterling, she lowered her head as if to ask a question about the service, bringing her mouth close to his ear. Her movements were smooth, a perfect imitation of a well-trained waitress. Sterling, annoyed by the interruption, at this crucial second began to turn his head, a scowl already forming on his face. He expected her to ask if he needed anything. Instead, she spoke 5 words, her voice a barely audible whisper. Yet each syllable was delivered with the unwavering certainty of a scientific law. "So that's the wrong formula." The whisper was so quiet, only he could have heard it. For a fraction of a second, the world held its breath. Damien Sterling froze his pen, hovering an inch above the signature line. His mind, accustomed to processing billion-dollar variables and complex market dynamics, struggled to categorize this bizarre, impossible input. A waitress. A formula. He slowly turned his head, his stormy grey eyes finally focusing on her for the first time all evening. He didn't see a uniform anymore. He saw a young woman with an expression of such intense, desperate sincerity that it momentarily cut through his annoyance. He saw eyes that held a startling, unnerving intelligence, but the moment of surprise quickly curdled into cold fury. Who was this woman? How dare she? The audacity was breathtaking. What did you just say? He breathed back his voice, a low, dangerous threat. Ellie didn't flinch. She had crossed the Rubicon. There was no going back. On the tablet, she whispered her gaze, flicking towards the screen. Thorne was now smugly turning off. The electrolyte solvent. The subscript is wrong. It won't be stable. Across the table, Mr. Tanaka, ever perceptive, noticed the exchange. He saw Sterling's frozen posture, the waitress whispering in his ear, the sudden and inexplicable halt to the proceedings. He raised a single questioning eyebrow. Marcus Thorne noticed too. A sneer twisted his lips. He saw a waitress overstepping her bounds, about to be annihilated by his boss. He almost laughed. Sterling's face was a mask of thunder. This was his moment of triumph, the culmination of years of work, and some menial worker was trying to sabotage it with nonsensical babble. He felt a surge of pure, unadulterated rage. His entire being screamed at him to have her thrown out to make an example of her. He opened his mouth to utter the words that would end her career, but something held him back. It was the look in her eyes. It wasn't madness, it wasn't malice, it was certainty. A terrifying, absolute certainty that he, in his long and storied career, had only ever seen in the eyes of Nobel laureates and world-class engineers. And it was coming from a waitress. The dissonance of it was so profound, it created a sliver of doubt, a hairline crack in the foundation of his fury. But it was a very, very small crack. Damien Sterling's rage, held in check for a brief, bewildering moment, finally erupted. It wasn't a shout. He was too controlled for such a vulgar display. It was a cold, focused implosion of fury. He pulled back from Ellie, his eyes turning to chips of ice. "Get out," he hissed the two words, laced with enough venom to wither steel. He didn't raise his voice, but the command carried the absolute authority of a man who had never been disobeyed. It was an order of social and professional execution. Marcus Thorne's smirk widened into a triumphant grin. He leaned back in his chair, ready to savor the show. Mr. Tanaka watched the scene unfold with the detached curiosity of a biologist observing an insect. Ellie's blood ran cold. The dismissal hit her like a physical blow. This was it. The moment she had feared. She had failed. She had gambled everything and lost in the space of 5 seconds. Humiliation washed over her, hot and suffocating. But as she straightened up, pulling away from the table, her eyes met Marcus Thorne's. She saw the undisguised pleasure on his face, the look of a man who enjoyed seeing others crushed beneath his heel. And in that instant, her fear was consumed by a different kind of fire. It wasn't just about the science anymore. It was about the arrogance, the carelessness of men like Thorne, who could ruin lives and companies with their incompetence and never face the consequences. She couldn't leave. Not like this. Ignoring Sterling's order, she reached for the pristine white linen napkin by her assigned serving station. With a swift, practiced motion, she snatched a pen from her apron pocket, a cheap ballpoint she used for taking orders. As Sterling turned to Mr. Tanaka, a forced, brittle smile on his face to smooth over the disruption, My apologies, a minor staff issue, Ellie acted. On the clean surface of the napkin, her hand moved with a speed and precision that belied her trembling. She didn't write words. She wrote the language of her former life. She scribbled the corrected chemical formula for the electrolyte solvent, changing the single erroneous subscript. Beneath it, she drew a quick, dirty diagram of the molecular structure circling the key bond, and beside that, she wrote 3 cryptic damning words: thermal runaway threshold, 90 degrees C. It was a warning, a prophecy. She strode back to the table. The men watched, stunned into silence by her sheer audacity. She didn't say a word. She simply placed the napkin on the table directly in Damien Sterling's line of sight, next to the open contract. Then she turned and walked out of the Elysian room, her back straight, her head held high. She didn't run. She didn't look back. She walked with the quiet dignity of someone who had said what needed to be said and was prepared for whatever came next. The moment the door clicked shut behind her, the spell was broken. Unbelievable, Marcus Thorne spluttered, his face red with indignation. "Damien, I am so sorry. I'll have security deal with her immediately. She's clearly unstable." But Damien Sterling wasn't listening. His gaze was fixed on the napkin, on the frantic yet precise scrawl of a chemical formula. A formula that was subtly yet significantly different from the one in his multi-million-dollar presentation. It looked strangely familiar. It sparked a distant memory from his own days at MIT, long before he became a CEO. Parcel, Tanaka leaned forward, his curiosity now fully engaged. The disruption was no longer a minor staff issue. It was a variable, an unknown that had been injected into a meticulously calculated equation. And Mr. Tanaka did not invest in unknowns. "Sterling-san," he said, his voice calm, but firm, his eyes on the napkin. "Perhaps you should look at what she wrote." The deal was no longer moving forward. The pen was capped. The contract lay unsigned. The entire $150 million venture now teetered on the edge of a precipice, its fate resting on the scribbles on a piece of linen. The atmosphere in the Elysian room had been irrevocably shattered. The smooth, celebratory momentum was gone, replaced by a tense, awkward silence. Marcus Thorne was fuming, Mr. Tanaka was observing, and Damien Sterling was staring at the napkin as if it were a venomous snake. "Damien, this is ridiculous," Thorne insisted, his voice rising in panic. "Are we really going to let some lunatic waitress derail this entire negotiation? I'll call building security." "Shut up," Marcus Sterling said without looking up. His voice was dangerously quiet. The seed of doubt the waitress had planted with her eyes had been watered by the ink on the napkin. Thermal runaway threshold, astisatiric. It was specific. It was a testable hypothesis. It was not the rambling of a madwoman. Damien Sterling was a billionaire, not just because he was ruthless, but because he was pathologically paranoid about details. He trusted his gut, and right now, his gut was screaming that something was wrong. He had built his empire by questioning every assumption, especially when things seemed too good to be true. And Thorne's performance tonight had been just a little too polished, a little too perfect. He picked up the napkin. He looked at the corrected formula, then glanced at Thorne. "Marcus, show me the raw simulation data for thermal stress testing." Thorne paled slightly. The raw data, Damien, it's all summarized in the presentation. It's perfect. We exceeded all safety protocols. "That's not what I asked," Sterling said, his eyes narrowing. "I want to see the raw output files. Now." Mr. Tanaka watched this exchange, his impassive face giving nothing away, but he subtly pushed the contract folder back towards the center of the table. The signing was officially on hold. "They're on my secure drive at the office," Thorne stammered, sweating now. I can have my assistant send them over, but it will take some time. Don't bother. Sterling stood up abruptly. Gentlemen, please excuse us for a moment. An internal matter requires my immediate attention. He grabbed Marcus Thorne by the arm, his grip surprisingly strong. You with me? He all but dragged his vice president out of the dining room and into a small adjacent study reserved for private calls. He closed the door firmly, shutting them in. The soundproofed room felt like an interrogation chamber. Don't lie to me, Marcus Sterling said, his voice dropping to a low growl. He released Thorne's arm, who stumbled back. Did you run the high-temperature stress sims yourself? Or did you let the junior engineers do it? I supervised the whole process, Thorne insisted, his bravado crumbling. The data is solid. Sterling ignored him. He pulled out his own encrypted laptop from his briefcase, a sleek carbon fiber machine, and set it on a side table. His fingers flew across the keyboard, accessing his company's private cloud server. He was a gifted engineer before he was a CEO, and he still had the skills. I'm pulling the logs from the simulation servers myself, Sterling said, his eyes glued to the screen. Every calculation, every input. If you cut corners, I'll find it. Thorne watched, his heart pounding. He hadn't cut corners, not exactly. He had trusted the initial positive results, and in his eagerness to finalize the presentation for the Kaito deal, had assigned the final, most tedious battery of high-temperature stress tests to a new intern. He had only glanced at the summary report, which had been glowing. He never checked the raw output himself. It was a minor oversight, born of ambition and a looming deadline. It couldn't possibly matter. Sterling found the project files. He opened the simulation software. He didn't run the original test again. Instead, with a grim determination, he input a new set of variables. He keyed in the formula from the napkin. He configured the simulation to run a high current charge-discharge cycle, pushing the virtual battery cell well beyond its normal operating parameters, specifically targeting the 90°C mark. Then he hit Enter. The simulation began. Lines of code scrolled down the screen. Graphs began to form. For a few seconds, everything looked stable. Thorne started to breathe a sigh of relief. And then a line on the temperature graph, which had been climbing steadily, suddenly shot vertically upwards. A cascade of red warning notifications flooded the screen. Critical molecular bond failure. Warning: catastrophic thermal runaway detected. Simulation terminated. The silence in the room was absolute. The screen glowed with the evidence of their near disaster. The original formula, Thorne's formula, was a catastrophic failure waiting to happen. The waitress had been right. Damian Sterling stared at the screen, at the glowing red warnings that spelled out his own doom. He felt a wave of icy dread wash over him, followed immediately by a surge of white-hot fury. He had come within a pen stroke of betting his company's future, his reputation, and 150 million of the Kaito Group's money on a lie. An unintentional lie, perhaps, but a lie nonetheless. A lie that would have ended him. He turned his head slowly, his gaze falling upon Marcus Thorne. Thorne looked like he had seen a ghost. His face was ashen, his tailored suit suddenly seeming 2 sizes too big for him. The slick, confident veneer had been stripped away, leaving only a terrified, ambitious man who had flown too close to the sun. Marcus Sterling said, and his voice was terrifyingly calm. It was the eerie quiet at the center of a hurricane. You didn't check the intern's work, did you? Thorne couldn't speak. He just shook his head, a pathetic, jerky motion. You saw the promising initial results, and you rushed it, Sterling continued, piecing it together. You wanted the glory for this deal so badly. You skipped the final verification stage. You took the summary and presented it as gospel. Damian, I swear I didn't know, Thorne whispered, his voice cracking. It was a small oversight. An honest mistake. An honest mistake. Sterling's voice rose, the calm finally breaking. An honest mistake that would have put exploding batteries in people's cars and homes. An honest mistake that would have made Sterling Innovations a synonym for disaster. You didn't just fail me, you fool. You almost destroyed everything I've ever built. He gestured wildly at the laptop. And the solution, the correct solution, was handed to me on a napkin by a waitress you wouldn't have spit on if she was on fire. The sheer staggering irony of the situation hit Damien with the force of a physical blow. He had been saved from his own hubris, from his deputy's incompetence, by the most unlikely person in the universe. He felt a bizarre mix of profound relief and profound humiliation. Without another word to Thorne, he turned and walked back into the Elysian room. His entire demeanor had changed. The anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but it was now overshadowed by a grim, focused clarity. Mr. Tanaka and his associate looked up as he entered. "My sincerest apologies for the delay. Kenji-san, Damien," said his voice, steady and controlled. He walked to the table and picked up the tablet Thorne had left behind. "There appears to have been a significant clerical error in our presentation." He reactivated the screen, deleted the flawed formula with a vicious swipe of his finger, and quickly input the corrected one from memory, the one from the napkin. My vice president, in his enthusiasm, presented a preliminary version of the formula. Sterling lied, smoothly throwing Thorne under the bus without a second thought. "This is the final, rigorously tested and validated version. As you can see, the change is minor, but it significantly enhances thermal stability under extreme duress." Mr. Tanaka leaned forward, studying the new formula. He saw the changed subscript. He was no chemist, but he understood the implications of a last-minute correction at this level. He also understood the power dynamics. He glanced towards the study door where Marcus Thorne was presumably cowering. "A fortunate catch, Sterling-san Tanaka," said his tone neutral, but a new, deeper level of respect had entered his eyes. He hadn't just seen a successful pitch. He had seen a CEO identify a critical flaw under pressure, take decisive action, and correct it with transparency. In his world, that was more valuable than 1,000 perfect presentations. It showed resilience. It showed integrity. "Indeed," Damien said grimly. "Fortunate." He looked at the unsigned contract. "We stand by this new formula. It is the basis of our partnership." Mr. Tanaka held his gaze for a long moment. Then he gave a slow, deliberate nod. He picked up his own pen. "Then let us proceed." The deal was saved. But for Damien Sterling, the night's work was far from over. As the two titans signed the documents that would reshape the energy industry, Damien's mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about a cheap ballpoint pen, a linen napkin, and a pair of intelligent blue eyes that had seen the truth when everyone else was blind. He had to find that waitress. While contracts were being signed and fortunes sealed, Elara Vance was in the sterile, fluorescent-lit staff locker room, changing out of her uniform. Her hand still trembled, but her mind was strangely calm. She had done what she had to do. The consequences were no longer in her control. She fully expected the door to burst open and for security guards to escort her off the premises. She imagined Mr. Dubois, his face purple with rage, telling her she'd never work in this city again. She methodically packed her meager belongings into her worn backpack, bracing for the inevitable impact. The door opened. Ellie looked up, her heart leaping into her throat. But it wasn't security. It wasn't Mr. Dubois. It was Damien Sterling. He stood in the doorway of the cramped locker room, a man who belonged in boardrooms and on the covers of magazines, looking utterly out of place amidst the rows of cheap metal lockers and discarded aprons. He had dismissed Marcus Thorne with a curt, career-ending, We're done, and had left the final pleasantries with the Cato Group to his legal team. His only priority was finding her. Ellie stood frozen, her backpack clutched in her hand. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The air crackled with unspoken questions. Sterling's expression was unreadable, a complex mixture of gratitude, curiosity, and sheer disbelief. He finally broke the silence. "They're going to name a battery after you one day," he said, his voice devoid of its earlier harshness. It was raw, direct, and no one will ever know it. Ellie swallowed hard. "Is the deal? The deal is signed," he confirmed. "Because of you. You didn't just save me $150 million. You saved my company. You saved my reputation. You may have even saved lives." He took a step into the room. "I have to ask." "How did you know?" The question hung in the air. This was her moment to tell the truth, all of it. The dam of secrets she had maintained for 3 long years finally broke. I am a chemical engineer," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "I was in the PhD program at Caltech. My doctoral thesis was on stabilizing lithium-sulfur cathodes. The formula you were using, it was an early hypothesis I personally tested and discarded 3 years ago. I saw it fail in a simulation exactly the way yours just did." Sterling's eyes widened. It all clicked into place. The confidence, the precision, the impossible knowledge. It wasn't a lucky guess. It was expertise. "Caltech," he asked, a new level of respect in his tone. "What happened? Why are you here?" Ellie looked away, the pain of her past welling up. "My mother got sick. Cancer. The treatments weren't covered. I had to drop out. I had to pay the bills." The simple, brutal explanation was all that was needed. Damian Sterling, a man who navigated the cutthroat world of corporate finance, was silenced by the stark reality of her sacrifice. He saw the ghost of the brilliant scientist standing before him in a cheap t-shirt and worn jeans, holding a backpack full of shattered dreams. He saw a mind that his company desperately needed, a mind that was currently scrubbing floors and clearing plates. The absurdity was overwhelming. He had spent millions of dollars on headhunters to find talent, half as good as the woman standing in front of him. He knew what he had to do. This wasn't about a reward. A check would be an insult to what she had done, to who she was. This was about correcting a cosmic error. "I'm not going to offer you money, Ms. Vance," he said, his voice firm. "Money can't fix this. I'm going to offer you a job." Ellie looked up, stunned. "A job? As a waitress in your corporate cafeteria?" He said, a faint smile touching his lips for the first time. "As the new head of electrolyte research and development at Sterling Innovations. You won't be working for my R&D department. You'll be running it. You'll have your own lab, your own team, and a budget that will make your old Caltech professors weep with envy. You won't be finishing your PhD. You'll be hiring people who have them." Ellie stared at him, speechless. It was an impossible offer, a fantasy plucked from a life she had long since mourned. Her mind, so quick with formulas and equations, couldn't process this. I don't have a degree," she stammered. "I dropped out." "You have something more important than a piece of paper." Sterling countered, his gaze intense. "You have the truth. Tonight you proved that. The job is yours if you want it. Your real life. The one you were meant to have." He held out his hand. "Don't let a fool like Marcus Thorne be the end of your story. Let him be the beginning." Tears welled in Ellie's eyes, not of sadness or fear, but of a profound, earth-shattering relief. The weight she had carried for 3 years began to lift. In that grimy locker room, surrounded by the remnants of her hardship, Ilara Vance reached out and took Damian Sterling's hand. She was done being invisible. 6 months later, The scent of antiseptic cleaners and ozone had replaced the lingering aromas of gourmet food and expensive perfume in Alara Vance's life. Her world was no longer defined by the dimensions of a serving tray, but by the limitless possibilities within a state-of-the-art laboratory. The pristine white lab coat she now wore felt more natural than the starched waitress uniform ever had. It was not a costume. It was her skin. Sterling had been true to his word, and then some. The Alara Vance research wing at Sterling Innovations was a scientist's paradise. Gleaming mass spectrometers, glove boxes for air-sensitive materials, and powerful servers running constant simulations lined the walls. Her team, which she had handpicked, was a collection of the brightest young minds in the field, postdocs, and recent graduates who looked at Ellie not with confusion about her lack of a diploma, but with a fierce, unwavering respect. They had all heard the legend, the story of how she had corrected the CEO on a napkin and saved the company. Her relationship with Damien Sterling had evolved into one of deep, mutual respect. He was no longer just her boss. He was her sponsor, her advocate, and, in a strange way, her collaborator. He would often visit the lab, his suit and tie, looking out of place, and they would stand before a massive glass whiteboard, arguing passionately about ion mobility dendrite formation and theoretical energy densities. He saw in her a purity of scientific purpose that he had lost in the boardroom, and she saw in him a visionary who could turn her theoretical ideas into world-changing realities. She had paid off all her mother's medical debt with her first signing bonus. She moved into a bright, airy apartment that overlooked the city, a place where she could finally breathe. The constant, gnawing anxiety that had been her companion for 3 years was gone, replaced by the thrilling hum of intellectual challenge. One afternoon, Damien walked into her lab. He wasn't smiling. He looked concerned. "The Kaito deal is facing a hurdle," he said, getting straight to the point. "Our manufacturing partner is struggling to scale up the synthesis of the electrolyte solvent. The process is too complex, too sensitive. We're falling behind schedule." The old Ellie would have shrunk from such a problem. The new Ellie saw an equation waiting to be solved. She spent the next 72 hours in the lab, fueled by coffee and sheer determination. She barely slept. She filled whiteboard after whiteboard with diagrams and calculations, her team working in shifts around her. She wasn't just trying to fix the existing process. She was rethinking it from the ground up. On the 3rd day, she emerged exhausted, but exhilarated. She called Damien to her lab. On the central whiteboard was a new formula. It was simpler, more elegant, and, according to her simulations, far more stable to produce. More than that, it had a theoretical energy density that was 15% higher than even her corrected napkin formula. It wasn't just a solution. It was an evolution. Damien stared at the board, his engineer's mind racing to comprehend the elegant genius of it. "Ellie, I was thinking about the problem all wrong," she explained, her voice hoarse but alive with passion. "We were trying to trap the polysulfides. It's like building a better cage. But what if we didn't have to cage them at all? What if we could convince them to stay where they belong?" She had created a new kind of molecular catalyst that promoted the direct and rapid conversion of long-chain polysulfides back into solid lithium sulfide on the cathode surface. It didn't just prevent the shuttle effect, it made the whole process radically more efficient. It was the breakthrough they were looking for. It was the breakthrough the entire industry had been waiting for. Damien looked from the whiteboard to Ellie. He saw the fire in her eyes, the fierce intelligence that had been hidden for so long. He had offered her a job to repay a debt. He now realized he had done more than that. He hadn't just saved her from a dead-end job. he had unleashed a force of nature. And together, they were about to change the world. 2 years passed, not in a blur, but as a series of sharp, vivid moments of triumph. The Vance Catalyst. As the R&D team had affectionately named Ellie's breakthrough, had gone into production 6 months ahead of schedule. The technology wasn't just a success, it was a paradigm shift. Stirling Kato batteries became the undisputed gold standard in the industry, powering everything from next-generation electric vehicles to grid-level energy storage solutions. Stirling Innovations' stock price quadrupled, and the $150 million deal that once seemed monumental was now viewed as the shrewdest investment of the decade. Elara Vance was no longer just a legend within the company. She was a name whispered with reverence in the halls of MIT and Stanford. She had been awarded prestigious innovation prizes and was a sought-after keynote speaker at energy conferences around the world. Dressed in a tailored blazer, she would stand before thousands of academics and industry leaders, explaining complex molecular chemistry with the same clarity and passion she once used to describe the dinner specials. She never failed to mention in her speeches that innovation could come from anywhere, and that the best ideas were often found when you listened to the quietest voice in the room. One crisp autumn evening, Damien Sterling invited her to dinner. He didn't tell her where they were going. When the car pulled up, Ellie felt a strange jolt of recognition. It was the Gilded Compass. The maitre d', a new man she didn't recognize, greeted Damien by name and led them not to the main dining room, but directly to the private Elysian room. The table was set for 2. It was the exact spot where her life had irrevocably changed. As she sat down in one of the plush chairs, she saw Mr. Dubois, her former manager, at the far end of the restaurant. He was no longer a manager. He was a senior waiter, his posture stooped, his face etched with a permanent look of weary resentment. He saw her, and for a fleeting second, his eyes widened in disbelief before he quickly looked away, busying himself at another table. There was no triumph in it, for Ellie, only a quiet, sad acknowledgement of how different their paths had become. I thought it was time to rewrite the memory of this room, Damien said, gently, unfolding his napkin. During dinner they didn't talk about profit margins or production schedules. They talked about the future. Ellie spoke passionately about her new project creating a fully biodegradable battery. She had also used her newfound wealth to establish the Eleanor Vance Foundation for applied medical research in honor of her mother, providing grants to brilliant but struggling graduate students who were on the verge of dropping out due to financial hardship. You know, Damien said, swirling a glass of wine, not a 92 Screaming Eagle, but a more modest, excellent vintage. I still have it. Have what? Ellie asked. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a small framed object. It was the original linen napkin from that night. Her frantic, powerful scrawl was preserved behind the glass. I keep it in my office, he said. Whenever a VP tells me something is a sure thing, or a consultant tells me something is guaranteed, I look at this. It reminds me that certainty is the enemy of truth. It reminds me that the most valuable person in the room might be the one serving the water. Ellie looked at the artifact of her old life, a testament to her moment of impossible courage. She was no longer that desperate waitress, nor was she only the brilliant scientist. She was both. She was a woman forged in hardship who had reclaimed her own genius. Looking at Damien across the table, she smiled a genuine, radiant smile of a person who was finally completely whole. The whisper in the dark had led her into the light, and her new beginning had become a legacy. Elara's story is a powerful reminder that brilliance isn't defined by a title, a degree, or a uniform, but by the courage to speak truth to power even when your voice is trembling. One whispered sentence changed her life and saved a fortune, proving that the most valuable assets are often the people we overlook. What hidden potential lies dormant in the people we interact with every day? Her journey from the shadows of a restaurant to the forefront of scientific innovation shows us that it's never too late to reclaim the life you were meant to live. If this story inspired you, please show your support by hitting that like button, sharing it with someone who needs to see it, and subscribing to our channel for more incredible stories of unexpected heroes. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss an update. Let us know in the comments, what would you have done in Ilara's position?